We just had St. Patrick's Day yesterday, right? I'm not very good at St. Patrick's. I don't think I've ever wore green in my life. It just never registers, and I never get lucky. So I go out and I never have green on, you know. That's to say it's not been a big deal to me. But what do you know about St. Patrick? It's a big celebration, by the way, nowadays, all over the world. Well, let me just share with you a little bit, because I didn't know a lot about him, so I studied a little bit about him. But let me just say, he was born probably in Scotland, in Britain. He was run by the Romans at that time, and I forget the year, probably 385, somewhere around there. So is not too, a few hundred years after Christ was here. The Romans were had their empire, and then the conquest out of China came to Mongolia and all those, and disrupted all that, and a whole lot of those tribes people end up pushing farther west, and so they start pushing into Rome. And so Rome pulled all their soldiers back, and they pulled all their soldiers out of Britain to protect Rome. And when they did that, then these heathen hordes, you might say, came from Ireland into Britain, and they grabbed a bunch of thousands of people and took them back and sold them as slaves. And Patrick was born into a fairly well-to-do Christian family, and he had his own Roman citizenship. But he was captured by these hordes out of Ireland at the age of 16. So he went to Northern Ireland and was sold as a slave, and for 6 years he herded sheep for a Droid chieftain. Because the Droids were predominantly up there at that time. These Droids were very heathen, very nasty people. They offered their kids as human sacrifices. When the Romans would fight them, these droids would come yelling and screaming so crazy that they thought they were demon-possessed people. Scared the daylights out of the Romans, because they're just a bunch of wild Northern Irish droids. And Patrick ended up being a slave for 6 years, which would be a huge change, would it not? From going to being a nice Christian home, wealthy, protected by Rome, being a Roman citizen, and all of a sudden they're gone, and all of a sudden these guys come in, grab you, and I don't know what it'd be like. I mean, to be sold as a slave, for us, that would be a pretty dramatic thing, and it was for him. And so, but he was a believer, but during that time then, with the sheep, he prayed a lot. He began, obviously, well, not obviously, but he did. He said, and I'm going to quote him here, he says, "But after I came to Ireland, every day I had to tend sheep. Many times a day I prayed. The love of God and his fear came upon me more and more, and my faith was strengthened. And my spirit was moved so that in a single day I would say as many as 100 prayers, and almost as many at night. And this even when I was staying in the woods and the mountains. I used to get up for prayer before daylight, through snow, through frost, through rain. And there the Lord opened the sense of my unbelief, that I might at last remember my sins and be converted with all my heart to the Lord my God, who comforted me as would a father his son." That was his part of his in his writing too. Which is really, again, when you think about somebody back in the 5th century, I don't know, those periods are hard for me to grasp sometimes, that they were Christians just like you and me. Learning this whole relationship with Jesus. And that it only happened, a few hundred years before that Christ was there. And there was a lot of controversy then, and just like there is now. And yet, here's a young man put into slavery, prays, and the Lord begins to comfort him like a father to a son, which makes that song we sang this morning even more. You're a good, good father. way back then. And so Patrick actually begins to really develop a walk with the Lord, and basically what he's doing is meditating. He's spending time alone with the Lord, singing. He's out in the, I'm sure as herding sheep, he was with the sheep when it was snowing, and when it was raining, he didn't head to the house. He was out there with them. And it said then he writes this: "One night I heard in my sleep a voice saying to me, 'It is well that you fast. Soon you will go to your own country.' And again a voice saying to me, 'See, your ship is ready, and it is not near, but at a distance of perhaps 200 miles.' Then I took flight and went in the strength of God, who directed my way until I came to that ship." So the Lord spoke to Patrick and just said, "It's time for you to go." And so he escaped. And it took several hundred miles, but he knew the direction to go. I don't know just how he showed him this in a dream or whatever else, but he found the ship, and he ends up getting back to his home country. He gets back and meets up with his family and reunited with them, but a lot of them had been killed, and etc. But now he's got this new strong walk with the Lord, so he ends up deciding to be a priest. So he goes to school and becomes a priest, and loves the Lord and is teaching and preaching. And then when he turns about 40 years old, he has another dream. And this he wrote in that book. He said, "In the depth of the night, I saw a man named Victorious coming as if from Ireland with innumerable letters. And he gave me one of the letters. And while I was reading it, I thought I heard the voice of those near the western sea call out, 'Please, holy boy, come and walk among us again.' This cry pierced my heart, and I could read no more, and I awoke." And with that, Patrick returned back to Ireland as a missionary, back to the Druids, which, again, was really witchcraft, magic, huge, and all that. So now he's 40 years old and heads back. And he spent the next, I don't know, it varies, some 40 years, 36 years, preaching and teaching and witnessing to the Druids in Northern Ireland. So he wasn't even, now if you look at today, St. Patrick's Day is a huge deal. There's a lot of drinking. Everybody wears green. And if I got the green thing right, it's because of the green three-leaf clover, right? And we got all this stuff out there now that really has nothing to do with what he did and who he was. The three-leaf clover was significant from the standpoint that's what he used to try to teach the Trinity to the Druids. Tell you the truth, I don't know about the whole snake thing, if it's anything valid to that or not. But what he did do, he went all around and continued to preach. But he also, and he had, he had death threats constantly. They tried to ambush him, try to kill him dozens of times. And I don't fully understand all this, but let me read some of this. He said, "Daily I expect murder, fraud, captivity, but I fear none of these things because of the promises of heaven. The merciful God often freed me from slavery and from 12 dangers in which my life was at stake, not to mention numerous plots. God is my witness who knows all things, even before they came to pass, and he used to forewarn even me of many things by divine message. I came to the people of Ireland and preached the gospel to suffer insult from the unbelievers. I am prepared to give even my life without hesitation and most gladly for his name. It is there that I wish to spend it until I die." And so that's what he did. He challenged the royal authority by lighting a Paschal fire, which is an Easter fire. And I don't know the history of this, but anyway, before Easter, he got on one of the high mountains there and built a fire. Well, with the droids, they had a law that you could not build a fire until after Easter or you'd be killed. And so he got on top of a hill and built this big fire. And so when they saw that, the king, Leary, he said, if we do not extinguish this flame, it will sweep all over Ireland. So he sent his bad guys to go get him, and it sounded just like, let's see, one guy said, the people saw Patrick's fire throughout the plain, and the king ordered 27 chariots to go and seize Patrick. It ended up that all of them were destroyed. God intervened, and in his book, I'll try to look a little bit here on that. Here's some of the chapters titles that he wrote in his book. Of his journey, of his manifold miracles, the sick man cured, the dead are raised up, the king and the people are converted, 19 men are raised by Patrick from the dead, the king, Echu, is raised from the dead, a man of gigantic stature is revived from death. These are all titles of the chapters of his book. Of another man who was buried and raised again. A boy torn to pieces by swine was restored to life. A woman was raised from death. The testimony of one which was revived from the death. He banished the demons forth from an island, which might be where all the snake stories came from. It goes on, sick people healed, etc. After 36 or 40 years of ministry, Patrick is credited to baptizing 120,000 people and founding 300 churches. He said, I came to where there's heathens and I left a Christian nation. I don't know about you, but isn't that amazing? Tell you the truth, I knew very little about St. Patrick, didn't really care. Heard the snakes thing. But for whatever reason, I said, I kind of want to figure that, find out what happened. And so I've read several different accounts, but I go, this is a guy that had a walk with the Lord, amen? Teenage boy, put into slavery, prays, draws near to God. God starts giving him spiritual dreams, supernaturally delivers him back to his homeland, trains him up, supernaturally calls him back to Ireland. He goes back and spends 40 years, just like the Apostle John. They said they tried to torture him. They tried to put him in boiling oil. They did all kinds of things to kill him, and he lived to be a ripe old age. St. Patrick died in Ireland in one of his churches. He's buried there. I could not find out what he died from, but changed the whole nation. St. Patrick's Day wasn't ever celebrated, if I got this right, until it started in America, not in Ireland. Some of the Irish that were here being persecuted began to celebrate their heritage with him of freedom and Christ, and so they started having parades and stuff in America. Well, then it quickly turned into an Irish big drinking brawl. And then it went, I think it's then was recognized in Ireland in 1995. That's not too long ago. And they said now it's one of the biggest international celebrated days internationally of all the days that we celebrate. It's a major one all over the world. When I was in Singapore, they were celebrating it once. Isn't that interesting? And yet most people have no idea who St. Patrick was. No idea about his story. No idea that he was such a godly man. No idea that he actually had supernatural visitations from God as far as leading him, guiding him, and then deliverance from being killed and over. And in defiance, he literally, would start these fires just to irritate him. Have the king send people to kill him and be delivered. All the rest of the story is interesting, isn't it? What is that to you? You follow me.